Okay, hello everyone. There's a few people yet to arrive, but as it's 6:30, we'll get going. But there may be a few slight interruptions as latecomers come in, so sorry, apologies for that. Hello and welcome to the third of 7 events here at the Drawing Room as part of the Making Drawing project. Events include in conversations which explore ideas, process and working practices of a range of artists, including Dryden Goodwin, which was on Saturday, for anyone who may have come to that. Fransica Furter, obviously, who's here today, which is fantastic to have her here because she's come all the way from Berlin just for today. Charles Avery on Thursday, and then finally Cornelia Parker on Saturday. As part of the project, I know some of you may know already and seen this online, but as part of the project we're running a series of workshops also. We've done one workshop which was on Sunday with Tim Knowles, which was fantastic. We have a workshop tomorrow with Gemma Anderson, and the final workshop on Friday with Claude Heath. All the information about all of these series of events as part of this project are on the Drawing Room website. So this project is very broad in its scope and remit, as well as workshops, talks and discussions, as I've mentioned. The project also includes a display of works in both galleries here at the Drawing Room. These works offer points of reference and punctuation to the project as a whole. Just by way of introduction, my name is Jack Southern and I'm an artist, educator, writer, and my creative output has also, to a degree, involved curatorial practice. This project here at the Drawing Room has evolved out of the publication Drawing Projects, which was a 2-year project which culminated in this book produced with Black Dog Publishing in 2011. This was co-written with Mick Maslin. As all of the artists involved in the project, this current project, Fransica Furter was also included in the publication. But as part of that publication, her feature included a short text which was written in support of her work. Unlike some of the other artists in the book, we didn't have the opportunity to do an extended conversation, but then luckily, some 6 months or so after we finished the book, Fransica Furter invited me to do an in-conversation with her at Towner Contemporary, which was coinciding with her show, a solo show she had there called Stray Currents. I can't remember which month it was now, but it was definitely 2011.
Yeah, I think October or November. Yep.
Aside from finding Francisca's work remarkable on many levels, I was really interested to include her work in the publication, the book I just referenced, but also this project. Because I think the way that Fransica works represents such a broad approach to the process of making drawings. 2-dimensional drawings often become 3-dimensional and vice versa. Works span small objects on the walls through to large-scale installations which explore space, site and installation, which I'm sure you'll get a sense of when Fransica starts to talk about her work. Two short quotes from the text from the book, which we subsequently slightly edited for the website of this project. Two-dimensional drawings develop from a wide range of references and found imagery. Works are often visualizations of the invisible, depicting movement, sound, imagined space and hallucinations. And in reference to some of her 3-dimensional works, Fransica Furter says, shifting between organic mineral structures and cosmic representations, 3-dimensional drawings play with the duality of aggressive appearance and extreme fragility. Something that seems to be a commonality between all of the different ways that Fransica works is this sense of ambiguity and this very particular kind of aesthetic but also atmosphere that the work has, I think. And in the text, Fransica says, there is always something ambiguous about my work. As scale shifts and time expands and implodes, and works elude the eye's focus, through a reductive approach to materials and colour, the work often juxtaposes material density with visual subtlety and ephemerality. So, with that short introduction, I'm going to hand over to Fransica, and the structure of this evening is that Fransica's going to show some of her work, which then we'll reflect on and have a brief conversation for perhaps a further half an hour. So Fransica will talk about her work for 20 minutes to half an hour, and we'll have a conversation about some of the working methods and processes and how ideas develop within her work. And then we'll save a bit of time towards the end of the evening, just in case any of you in the audience have any questions. So I'm just going to really give a warm welcome to Fransica and thank her so much for being here. And she's going to run through some of her work with you.
Thank you very much for coming. Oh, that's still from the book?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I try to speak quickly because I think it's quite cold in here, and before we all freeze to death. When I got the invitation to talk here, I thought I would focus or concentrate on the making of drawing and drawing making, because that's the topic of the event. But then I realized when I prepared the talk that this is my work anyway, so the making is, I would talk about it anyway. That's maybe why Jack invited me. But for me it's something natural, or it just happens. It's something I don't even think about it, I think. So for me it was interesting to have a focus on it again, because normally it just, I forget about it. So I will show about 10 works. I chose them because I think it gives a good overview about what I did in the last few years. And I will start with a work from 2006, that's the oldest one. It's called Columba, and that means, it's Swiss German for lump. And it's made out of hundreds and hundreds of knots of nylon thread, and the size is actually only 5 centimeters, so only about 2 inches. So this is totally over-exaggerated, and it's a bit of a bluff when it's blown up like that. I've never seen it like this myself. And it shows quite well how the work itself is visible, because every knot is visible, and it shows the whole time I was working on it. But the important thing about this work is that I tried to relax from doing drawings. At that time I was making huge ink drawings with black ink, and I wanted to keep the flow of working, so I didn't want to watch TV or knit or something, so I tried to find something that I can do to keep me working. And because I didn't think about it as a work, I think it became one of my favorite works still, because it has this lightness and it has an immediacy which is almost impossible to plan, I think. And it's kind of a work that it's difficult to plan or force to make a work like that, because it starts only at the corner of my eye. And the next work I show is a series of pencil drawings, and just to keep the years a bit. These are from 2008. They're all about A3, And I collected existing visualizations of hallucinations, visions, dreams, or transfers from one world to another. So I was collecting images from comics, films, and mangas. And I just put them all in the same size, and it's all only pencil on paper. And the whole series is called Vision, but each of them has an individual name, which is a sedative, or the name of a sedative. So it plays against what you see as well, or what it is. So that's something I like to do. This is the ambiguity again, that even in the title I try to kind of work against what you see, or the content is kind of, the title is part of the work as well. And I have a few close-up, and some of them are, it's quite visible what it is or was. So this is kind of a building disappearing, and some are, you can still see landscapes, or some of them are just like really abstract. And because it's pencil drawings, it's kind of from certain angles, it's shiny, or and the shininess blurs the view, so you kind of have to find the point of the angle in front of the drawing to kind of fully see the whole drawing, even though it's quite small, but sometimes, yeah, you get the reflection of the pencil. And this is a series called Fathom, or it comes from Fathom, and here I play with time as well, because I do scribbles on the computer, and I do hundreds of scribbles and choose the ones I like, and I print them out, I cut them out of foil, put the foil on the paper, and in the end I put aluminium foil on top and take the foil away again, and this is the aluminium leaf that stays on the paper. So it's a whole process, a complex process, until I get this funny little scribble. And yeah, I like to play with this, that it's not, or it's not always, English. Sometimes it's not what you see, or the thing is done differently, or the making of is part of what it ends up. Because in the first moment you just think, oh, it's a scribble. But when you go close up, you see it's kind of a shiny, thin layer. And sometimes I do it big as well. This is directly on the wall. I did it at Tauners, and at Tauners I think it was 3.5 meters long and about 2 meters high. And now it gets warm. And this is a series called Draft, and I was collecting, I tried to get away from using existing images, so I kind of still used existing images, but kind of left them directly. I used them, but then I just used them how I wanted, and not like, for example, the visions, they were kind of one-to-one sometimes, and this, I became a bit free. I got free. I freed myself. So this is a lot about movement and time. So in comics, for example, if they show the speed, if a person runs, they have these lines behind their back to show this person is running, and I collected those lines. So they're kind of out of context, nobody knows what they are, but I use them to do the drawings. And some of them are, yeah, this one looks a bit like a mountain, or some of them look a bit like stock market graphics. Others look more like sound waves or light and shadow. So I was really playing, and here, oh, it's a bit too dark, because normally the surface of, it's pencil as well, the surface of the pencil is shiny from some angles as well, so it's really a closed up surface, but as soon as you step two steps aside, you can really see the strokes of the pencil, and so kind of you see the time and the making of the drawing as well. And these are 140 high by 110, 1 meter 10, so quite big. And surprise, during that time I did those drawings, I was knotting nylon again. And I couldn't resist because I found black nylon. And I thought I'd do a kind of a counterpart to the little Columba I did a few years ago. This is just hundreds of knots again, but this is about that size, about 30 centimeters diameter. And the name is, because at that time I had a residency in Paris, and the name of that one is bourdon, which means bumblebee, and that's the same word for a low bell or a low organ pipe. So I like to play with the sound as well, or because I thought it really looks a bit like sound waves, or it reminds me on sound. And the next one, this is a small pavilion in a huge park in France. It's about 40 minutes south of Paris. It's called Chamarande. And when I was invited to do something in that pavilion, I just came back from Cairo, from a 3-month residency in Cairo. And for about 3 months, or when I arrived, it was just the end of the Ramadan, so it was a big, huge party in all the streets, and they decorated the streets with the buntings. And I used those buntings, or I have to say, because some of them were left for 3 months, so they were just like in my sight for about 3 months, and they ended up to be like drawings on the sky, or they became a bit two-dimensional. So in the end I didn't see party buntings anymore, so it was really a drawing for me, and I decided to fill the whole pavilion with the buntings, and it was not possible to go inside anymore, so it was really closed up, and it looked a bit like a children's party, but nobody was invited. And then something I like to do often is to play with my own work, and to kind of, because at the same time I had a show in Zurich in a gallery, and I just decided, because it was, I mean, maybe you recognize that I don't do that much colorful works, so it was obvious, or for me natural, that I have to do it in color in this pavilion, because the light was special. So there was no question if I would do it in black, but I liked the idea of doing it in black as well, because it became more abstract and it's less familiar. So that the thought to bring it to a drawing is much more easier. And I liked the idea as well that these two works exist at the same time. But it's not something people need to know, it's just for me as well, like something that that I like. And here's the work is called Some Echoes, Some Shadows, and I do show it. If I'm invited to show it again, I do it. But every time I try to show it in a different way, to adapt to the space. And here, the colors are really bad. I'm sorry. Okay, quickly. The whole building is like two sides are concrete and the rest was glass. And I was not allowed to put any nails into the walls. And they wanted to have this work. So in the beginning I thought it's impossible to show it, but then I found a way. If it hovers in the space, I can use nylon thread. So I was working with the space and with my work. And I like that my work can shift as well, or in stone. I can play with it. And then in the next image you can see it as well. This is the same work in black I showed in Zurich, but totally different, again with nylon, and it makes something totally different with the space, and the work itself is different as well. So these are the latest works. They're called islands, and all of them are about like 30-40 centimeters big, and I did a whole series of them, and if you walk towards them, they really look like two-dimensional, and only with the shadow you can imagine that they might be three-dimensional. And the important thing is that the rings are only held together by the wire that is around the whole rings. So I put on a surface or a coat on the rings, but that's at the same time it makes the sculpture or the drawing possible. And again, it's important that you kind of walk around it and that it can shift from 2 to 3 dimension. And these are works I did last year. They're called coronas, and the technique, they're quite big as well. I think 150 high and 126 wide. And I had an idea that for edition I was supposed to do, that I would like to do this marbling technique, and that would mean I have a little a little bassin, how do you say that in English? Basin of water, and I put 1 drop of color and 1 drop of soap, and the soap pushes the color away so that I have a ring in the end. And I just thought it would be nice to try that huge, or as big as possible that I can manage myself. And this was just the size I could manage myself. And for me, the interesting thing is because I didn't trust it first, because it's so quickly done. I just put some drops of color in it, I put some soap, and the drawing is kind of done. So I thought first I really need to do something else. Do I have to draw it like by hand again? But in the end, until I was happy with what I had to do hundreds again. So I kind of came back to my making and intense time frame again. So somehow it's really something I don't I don't think about, but it just happens. I think I was really quick now. Well, I forgot everything. Yeah, that was it. Sorry, that was quick.
Being in your studio 2 years ago, actually, there's 2 or 3 students here today who were with me, and we came to your studio to do a visit. You kindly said, "Come to the studio and bring some students. That would be great." And your studio in Berlin, and there was lots of gathered materials. There were materials everywhere in the studio, and they were piled up, and there was materials stuffed on tops of cabinets. And we started talking about the process of making and how ideas develop through the process of your connection and your manipulation of materials. And you said something in that studio visit that some of the students have since quoted back to me, because they found it a really important, a really kind of profound thing.
So I made an impact.
Yeah, you made an impact, profound thing in relation to this idea of really investigating a process or the idea of how works actually predominate, from the point of playing with materials through to the conception of something that you might want to exhibit. And the thing that you said was that you often play with materials, and the things that you don't expect to become works actually become the works. And yeah. For me also, it was a very interesting insight into that process. And
back to that one then.
When you referenced one of the earlier works, yeah, this one. You said just at the beginning of your talk, you said starts in the corner of my eye. I thought that's a lovely phrase, because it made me think about being in that context of being in your studio with materials everywhere, and maybe a sense of repetitive actions or intuition, ways of manipulating materials, then become works. And it's almost as if they become works without you realizing.
Yeah, or I think those are my favorite moments, actually, when something just happens. And I mean, often I have a huge idea and I think, wow, that will be a wonderful work. But then something else happens on the side, or just sometimes an accident almost. And these are more interesting often than the thing I planned or the thing I've thought about, because that sometimes is just maybe thought about too much, or too controlled, and too much trying to push the material into something I want it to be, but that doesn't work sometimes. So I really think it's the most pleasurable time when it just happens. Well, maybe as well, as I said, that it's almost impossible to plan, because it cannot be playful, because if I do something on purpose, then I thought about it. So. Yeah. So
and I guess how the material changes through that process has a huge impact on how the work develops. Because materials, in a sense, can begin to make decisions for you in that process of making.
Yes, most of the material has kind of a character or an atmosphere as well, or something that it does. And for example, knotting nylon is a bit daft, I think, as well, or because it doesn't really. Did anybody knot nylon yet? No, probably not. Or it's just difficult that the knot stays a knot, because if the nylon is too thick or too wide, it just opens up again. So if you do 10 knots after each other, then the first 5 they stay. So it's kind of you have to continue that it stays like I just did it. Yeah.
And this is a related question, but when I came to the Towner exhibition, and also when I've seen other exhibitions of your work, the thing that's really struck me, and I'm desperately trying to find a better word, because I don't necessarily like the idea of talking about the word atmosphere, but there's an amazing authority to the work, I think, and there's a duality in the sense that I think that the work has such an identity and a clarity and a sense of conviction. It's very affirmative work. It seems to be a very resolved set of decisions that have been made in order to exhibit the work. But then, because perhaps of the kind of visual qualities that the work has, and also the different conceptual connotations that the work has, it has this sense of not being absolute, of being questioning and being suggestive. And I guess you talked a little bit about that in relation to the last works you showed, where as you approach those works, if they're exhibited on the wall, from a distance they may look two-dimensional. The shadows might suggest that they're three-dimensional. As you get close, the reflective qualities, shimmers, it's almost like the work, even when installed in galleries, is in flux or in constant change or movement. And I just found, particularly with the Towner show, it was an incredible kind of contrast and duality.
Yeah, but this is often something I don't really plan as well, but because I like to play with my own work, I think that maybe playfulness stays as well, or because, for example, this was something we talked about at the Towner as well. That if I would have done the Towner show maybe 3 months later or 6 months earlier, it would have looked different, even though it's the same space, maybe even the same works, but because I'm there with the works and it's a different day, and the works would look different because I can put them around as well, or I can adapt them to spaces, or I try to keep that alive as well. Or I like when when it seems to be the only right way, but I know this isn't the case, because yeah, maybe that's why I'm not painting, because I always thought when I'm painting, it's kind of written in stone, and it has a power, and I have to find the only possible solution. And I think drawing, and even calling three-dimensional works drawing, makes it easier for me to have this play, or this shifting, how did you call it now? That it stays flux. Even though most of the time it's part of the work itself anyway, but I think it works the best when it's kind of doubled almost.
But I guess there's something at the crux of what I'm trying to say, which is about how the work functions in quite a remarkable way for me. Because when you look very closely at the work, there's so many very particular aesthetic decisions, and the visual appearance of the work seems so acutely considered and controlled, and yet the way that the works come together.
I mean, it's funny because for me, it's I'm not so conscious of that. I think it's not that I try to be as precise as possible. It's just most of the time I don't know if I can say much about that. But it just, most of the time it happens. But maybe it's also because I try to reduce often. With reduction, I get closer to what I'm looking for. Because it's easier to have less information and less stuff that distracts me as well. So, yeah, I mean, this work is only nylon and nothing else. And the other drawings, most of the drawings are just pencil. And I can just, I think, work more precisely if I only have the necessary material as well. And for a long time I really didn't do colorful works as well. But now it starts, and at the moment my whole studio is very colorful. Don't know how that happens, but it's not red or green, it's like the whole rainbow colors. So I can't even concentrate on only red. I would never do that, so it's the whole range.
In relation to thinking about how these works come together and how they relate within a space, when you put them into an exhibition, you said some lovely things in a conversation that we previously had, that there's a sense that the works belong together in the space. So there's, like, this is referencing something you said a few minutes ago in relation to the idea that that's one solution. If you arranged the works, or the works came together in that space 2 weeks later or 4 months later, for example, there may be another set of conditions that really have a big influence on how those works relate and how they're displayed. So it's almost like there's a kind of perfect moment where those works come together. And I love the idea of the sort of poetry of that. And you said gestures brought together in one space. And I think that says something very profound about the way that the works come together, and then this relationship that is formed.
Yeah, I very much like the word gesture as well, because it has something of a movement, and time is in it, but it means something temporary as well. I like it when it is temporary as well, and it can move. Then it has more to do with life maybe, or just it's more lost the thread now. Sorry.
We talked at Towner, and also in recent conversations we've had, we talked a lot about balance, and obviously we've already covered that slightly in this conversation, but this idea that there's these different forces at play within the work, and somehow they form a kind of equilibrium, they form a balance. And I suggested a number of phrases, such as the balance between concept and intuition, which you particularly liked. The balance between the work feeling like it's static and made for that particular moment in time, but also in flux, in a constant sense of change. Purposeful yet questioning, permanent yet temporary. I guess that relates to some of the actual physical qualities of the materials that you use. Vivid yet ambiguous, this sense that we've talked about a little bit before. Rigorous yet playful, familiar yet rare, both a shout and a whisper, because that was something that really struck me particularly about the Towner show. The visual qualities of the work and the sense in the space that some elements of the exhibition are so quiet and whisper. They're visually very subtle, and other elements are so strong and physically demand your attention.
I mean, I do have a little catalogue of the Towner show if anybody's interested, because I didn't show pictures, but I do have a little catalogue. So let me know if you want to look at it. Sorry, interrupted you. The musical part I think is quite, or it has to do with time again, because I think it's an aspect I just love, because it makes it vivid as well. Or music and sound needs time as well, because or a drawing or a painting, you can, even though you don't get the whole concept in a glimpse in a second, but you can see what's there. And a film or music and a song, you always need time to get the whole thing. And it's something that I try to do as well, that to have this time frame and the musical aspect in the work. To kind of, it's just a new level as well.
When you talk about time, are you talking more about the relationship of time to making?
I think it's really connected to each other. I mean, sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, you're really patient," or "You can be hardworking," but this is not the point. The point is more that I want the aspect of time in the work, and that needs my time. And I like that when you see that it took that much time, or a lot of time to make it, to kind of to have time in it. I think I need time worked into it.
But again, I think sometimes there's illusionary qualities to do with the materials that are confusing in terms of how things are made and then how much time might have been invested in them. Like you were talking, the final work you talked about, as from a distance, because you just see the structures of the shapes. They could be solid pieces of metal or steel. When you get up very, very close, as you said, you realise that they're meticulously, painstakingly wrapped. And that's actually what holds the structure together. So I think a lot of the work, you can really get that sense of endeavour, of time spent in the making, but it's not always obvious at first glance.
Yeah.
Is that an ambiguity, another ambiguity in the work that's important?
Yeah, I think so. Or it's not, again, it's not something I'm looking for, or something I really decide, or if I need less time, then I don't try to find a way how I could use more time. It's not like that. It's just, it happens that it is the idea then to wrap the rings and to make the rings, like mount the rings together in a logic, like this is the concept in a logic way, but then it's the only possibility to do it through, because I can't just use the connection, or I can't just wrap the connection, because then it loses the poetry almost. So I need to wrap it all to give it a surface that it disappears again. Yeah, I think so.
But then I guess that relates to this idea of working with materials and allowing their formal qualities to really direct the work at some stages of the process.
Yes, I don't know exactly how I find material as well, because I've got lots of stuff that didn't work out, or for example the colored wire I'm using now. I had it in my studio for ages and it didn't work out. I made a few things, but it just didn't flow. So I have to go on and wait and make something until it works out. Well, and this is again something I can't really plan.
I think that sense of kind of momentum and flow within the work relates quite heavily to the idea of, or what you may perceive to be an action that relates to a definition of drawing, because you've already referenced painting and said that there's something that you feel is more definite and absolute about this idea of making a painting, but making a drawing, does it allow you to have this kind of sense of freedom in the making and a different way of adapting and changing your approach to materials by allowing everything you make to be thought of as drawing?
Yes, definitely. Because as well, I don't call my works, even the three-dimensional ones, or the three-dimensional ones, I don't call them sculptures or objects. I really call them drawings, to kind of make them also lighter, or lighter for me as well, that I don't think, because somehow sculpture and painting sounds too heavy for me, or too, for me it's to give the work some freedom as well. And because drawing it's not like sketches, but drawing is something between sketch and painting maybe. So. What else? I mean, the concept and intuition part is quite important for me as well, because I like to have a concept and to give myself rules I can follow, but at the same time, if I don't like the rules, I just change them, or I kind of, it's not that I have to follow it through the end. So it's constant back and forth between concept and intuition, and sometimes when I start with something, I don't know exactly what comes out at the end, and I like it very much when it turns around, and when I have a fixed idea, most of the time it's not really a good work. But if I let myself be guided somehow, it sounds a bit like an excuse, but this is just what makes it interesting for me as well, because when I know what I want to do, I don't really need to do it anymore. Does that make sense? So I need to kind of be able to detour.
And if you need that flexibility and that ability to need to detour and change and be in flux and work intuitively, does that mean that you need to work with a number of materials and perhaps work on a number of works together at the same time in the studio environment?
Yeah, if I have enough space, yes, it would, yeah. I mean, when you came to my studio, it was quite a small studio, so I only could have maybe 2 works at the same time. So if I wanted to do something else, I had to kind of remove one stuff. So at the moment I have quite a big studio, so it's much better, because then I can just leave it for a week or 2, or maybe even a month or longer. And it's just nice to go back to it, and maybe I have an idea or a new idea at one point. And sometimes things happen as well during time. So, yeah.
What do you mean by things happen?
I have a different point of view. I look at it or for example with the buntings in Cairo. When I arrived, I just saw buntings, and I saw decoration for party. But after 3 months of looking at it, and I mean, maybe it has to do as well with my time in Cairo, because it was really tough as a woman walking through the streets, so I tried to avoid to look into people's faces, because that made them talk to me. So because I was tired to look at the floor, I was looking up in the sky, and so I saw those buntings all the time, and during those 3 months they just became drawings, and I didn't think of it at the beginning, for example, or, it's just something that my point of view changed through time, or made me be aware of something. And sometimes I hate it because it took 3 months, or it took almost 3 months to realize it, and I thought, why didn't I have this idea on the second day? Because it was the same thing, but obviously, again, it takes time.
You needed that time spent.
Yep.
And how do you think, in reference to the bunting work, because so many of your works, become abstractions, with the bunting, there's this relationship to something representational that has a set of connotations. How do you think that's different, as opposed to some of the other works where you might recognise motifs, but they're motifs that have been created by your own personal visual language, I think?
I mean, because you think like the buntings are like something existing, familiar. Yeah, I think it just became a line and a geometrical form in the end. And with looking at it for 3 months, I guess that, because in the end it was not decoration anymore, but also because, most of them, after 3 months in dusty, sandy air, they just looked different as well.
Because it relates to this idea of familiarity, because I found, especially with the Towner show, there's a sense of familiarity about some of the visual qualities in the work, but then there's also this sense of kind of otherworldliness. There's this I guess at the beginning of the talk, when I was referencing this idea that the works are remarkable to me, I think that's part of it, because the aesthetic of the work feels so unique, but then there's also aesthetic strands that follow through and similarities between all of the works, but it has an otherworldly quality, I think.
Yeah, or I think my work, sometimes my work works for me is the best when you think, I know what this is, or this looks familiar, and you almost could go away and, I got it, but then when there's something behind it, or it could be something else as well, when there is a kind of a shadow, for example, to it, or something behind that what you see, or I like that irritation as well, when it could be something else, or it's almost something else as well. I like that very much.
And what do you think is the main thing that triggers that sense of ambiguity? Is it the visual qualities? So the way that those visual qualities interact, and the way that the works interact with space. And you talked a lot about shadows.
It's a balance thing again. When everything is in that hovering balance, not like subtle and finished and dead, but like this kind of almost, like a balance. When it finds that right moment. And sometimes, I find it as well when I show drawings and three-dimensional drawings together. Because sometimes it's a bit difficult if I only show drawings, sometimes I miss something, because then the three-dimensional aspect is missing. I'd like to show both together, because they give each other something. Or they add, they help each other. That's why maybe Towner was really a great opportunity for me to really, because the space is huge, it's about 300 square meters, and the light is quite specific, like from the ceiling, and it's just one huge white cube, and I could just play with my work in the space and yet find the spots where it stays, it has this almost airless moment. It's like like a breath, almost. Yeah.
In various conversations we've had, you've talked about, not public conversations, but private conversations, you've talked about a clip from Derek Jarman's film, and the relationship between the content of that clip and your work. Could you just say a little bit about that? Do I have it with me? Normally I have it with me since years. It's just at the end of the film of Wittgenstein, Derek Jarman's film about Wittgenstein, when he's on his deathbed, a friend of his tells him his own story about his life, and that it starts like there was a young man once, and he tried to find the pure logic. He tries to put the whole world into pure logic, and he succeeded because he was a really clever man. But then he tried to do a step into this world, and he just slipped. He fell over because he forgot about friction, and friction seems to be really important to live in the world. So I quite like that aspect of pure logic is nice and great to think about, but it's not livable. So friction. I think it might be a nice point to see if anyone's got any questions for you.
Yeah.
Has anyone got any questions for Fransica? Here's one.
Okay. Hello.
I just wondered with this piece, did the form make itself when you're writing the process, or did you shape it into a sphere?
I just made a huge thread, like knots and knots after each other, and so in the end I had a huge thread. And first of all I thought, why don't I show that one? But because I had to transport it, I just wrapped it up to a little ball. And in the end, I decided to show it like this. Because it was so dense and light at the same time that I just liked it. But I didn't plan it that way.
So it was a lot of your work, you create a line through quite a kind of time-consuming process, such as this. But the line, then you use that line that you created to create a form. So it's a sort of two-part process.
Yep.
And the pieces that use the circles as well. So you create the circles, total circles, which are lines, and then you create three-dimensional forms through combining in those pieces that are formatted.
Yeah, I mean, I don't produce the circles myself. So I
But you
bought them.
no. What do you do with the circles? You cover, what are the circles made of?
They're steel as well, or metal rings. They exist, I think, for making lamps. To use, I don't know exactly what they're used, but they exist. But I bought them and had them in my studio for ages as well, and I didn't know what to do with them for a long time, and somehow they became a form. And
so how do you actually join them together?
with a wire.
Oh, with wire.
Isn't it possible to see it? Sorry, that's quick. Too fast. Okay. Right, it's maybe a bit visible. Here you can see the golden surface, and that's the wire. I wrapped the whole metal ring in wire. So I go around like this, and I put the rings together beforehand. So I just keep on wrapping it. But if they're not welded or something like that, they're really just put together.
But they're fixed.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're quite
What's
solid.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, so one can touch them and hang them on the wall like this. But this is something I have to find. I have to find the balance as well, because if the ring is only touching at 2 points, for example, it's wobbly. So I need, if I want it to be solid enough, I need 3 points of connection. So again, I do have a concept, but I'm quite free, and I just, the image is not so great, but they're all totally different.
So you're still making the large ink pieces as well?
The large?
The ink pieces that use the process of photocopying and enlarging?
Not so much at the moment. So I didn't use the copy machine for ages. Yeah, somehow, the draft drawings with the pencil, I used images and scanned them, but I only had like small sheets of sketches, and I kind of played on the paper itself then.
Does anybody else have a question?
Not really, I think. Because I have my guidelines or my stories about the work sometimes as well. But if I would tell them, I think I would guide too much into a direction, and I enjoy it when my work is quite open, or when it's open for associations and people can think themselves. Because I don't really, it's not that important what I thought while I was doing it. So that's why I'm most of the time a bit shy to give ideas about how something started to exist. Or sometimes it's just nice, or the stories, but often I leave it. Also because. Yeah, for example, this ambiguity is, if I tell the story sometimes it's too direct or too obvious in which direction it should go, and with the title, for example, I try to kind of give a new direction as well. So I would, maybe it's, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes, most of the time I know the space before I really decide what to show, and sometimes I adapt already existing works, and then somehow one comes to another, or sometimes another work needs something else. But this is kind of it's a decision often in the space or with the space itself. And I like to develop something for a space as well, but this is not always possible. For example, in this show, it was kind of the first idea that I showed the buntings, the black ones, and at the same time I had those rings, I started to do the colorful rings. Actually, they are rainbow colored, also with wire around it. And then at that time I was working with the topic of the weather quite often, because I liked it as a kind of source for titles, or I really love the metaphoric power of weather as well. But maybe that's the British influence, because I had two residencies in Britain already, one in Edinburgh and the other one was in London. So maybe that's why I really love to talk about the weather as well.
There's one.
Oh, I didn't see anything.
Your work's particularly colourful, and I was wondering how you cope with doing a residency and having a sort of fixed time to be able to produce work, but having the serene calmness of it seems very painful still, but with the deadline, how that
Yeah. I mean, I had the luck to have a few residencies yet, so I think I'm quite used to it as well, and I love doing residencies because it puts you in a different surrounding as well, and you have to adapt in a certain way, but you have to kind of stay yourself. So it's flux again. So I like that, to be confronted with something else, and maybe that's part of the playfulness as well, that maybe, I guess that I changed studios, or sometimes I'm only there with a little, like a box of tools, and you don't have all the nails you need, or you don't have the drill, for example, so you have to find a different way of doing something, and that's maybe part of it even. I guess it was really helpful to have residencies. Does that answer? Do you see anything? I don't think. No more questions?
What's coming up next?
Say
What's
it
coming up next?
I only thought about until today. So I have one solo show in my gallery in Zurich in autumn, late summer. So that's something I will work forward to. And a few small things, but I think first now I'm having a few free days in London, looking at shows. And one thing I'm really curious about is the show of Hannah Höch at the Whitechapel Gallery. So I'm a huge fan of her work, so that's something on my plan.
There's a question.
I was thinking, when I was looking at your work, I was quite interested in these 4 drawings that you did, which have titles of drugs. I just wondered what the titles of those 4 were. Also, I was thinking in terms of the fact that you're a Swiss artist. I don't know if you think of yourself as that, or you're from Switzerland and you grew up in Switzerland. And there's quite a lot of what I think of as quite Swiss things, drugs.
Basel Pharmacy,
Yeah.
I think.
And I just wondered, because there's this huge history of fantastic Swiss artists, and I wondered if you felt you were part of that, and you were just talking about diversities in countries and things. I was just wondering how much of your Swissness and your kind of Swiss culture has been part of making you make what you make, if at all.
Difficult for me to say. I mean, most of the time when people talk about Swiss art, it's like people like Fischli-Weiss and Lutz Guckisberg, and Roman Signer, for example, and they all have this huge humor in their work, and I think that's, I don't know if that's something Swiss, or I would call it that these people are famous outside of Switzerland. And I don't know if it has anything to do as well with the humor in their work and the international attention they get. So I don't really know what is Swiss about my work, but I don't live there anymore since 2007. Oh, no, 2005 actually. It's almost 9 years. So I don't know, maybe you can tell me more about, is there still some Swissness left?
I don't know, I'm sort of interested in that I spent a year in Switzerland, so I got quite a strong idea about, the amount of Swiss art. It was almost got to the point where every artist I thought of, that at some point had some connection with Switzerland, that they'd been born there, and done residence there, but also I'm talking like, historically right there. And I suppose when I look at your work, I see a lot of humour, and I see a lot of playfulness. You're sort of talking about this shiny drawing surface, for example, and I really find that very kind of beautiful, but also kind of charming and playful. So I actually do think of your work as being quite humorous, but I don't think of all Swiss work being humorous like Lewis Harvey or any number of I just sort of wonder, because also you've left the country behind, and I just wondered if you sort of felt this connection with, I don't know, chocolate, rabbits.
Oh, rather mountains then.
But not as in chocolate, as in Swiss chocolate, as in Dieter Rose, or all these sort of very playful, big risk-taking artists.
Yeah, not on purpose yet, but maybe, who knows? I mean, I didn't leave the country fully. I still pay taxes in Switzerland because I never thought I would really go somewhere else forever. So I was in London for a while, and then now I'm in Berlin for a while, but it's in flux as well. So I never really left Switzerland officially. So maybe that is something that makes me kind of walk around with a light suitcase as well. And I like to transport my own work in a suitcase as well, or on the bike, but it's not always possible. But think about the chocolate work. I'll let you know.
I have another question.
Again, okay.
I wondered when some of your works are very quick to make, some of them really long, and I was wondering if you could remember what you were thinking about for everything.
I didn't understand it properly.
So I was wondering, your works take different lengths of time to make, but some of them take quite a lot of time. But I was wondering whether when you think about an individual work, whether you can remember what you were thinking about at the time. Not in terms of necessarily how difficult it is to tie a knot, but actually what your
Like planning-wise more?
No.
Not planning-wise.
in terms of, whether that was a period where you were, I don't know, thinking about changing your wardrobe or
I don't know. I don't know what to answer. Maybe I don't. I mean, the length. No, I don't know. Do you have an answer?
I guess when you look back at, I don't know if this relates to the question, but when you look back at particular works that you've made, were there things, predominant ideas and thoughts that were going through your head that you can then reconnect with? Is that, yeah?
Yeah, sometimes, and I think one thing I really strongly do somehow is, that's why I like to live with my work as well, or to not live at home, but to have them around in my studio, that one gives the next, or one is, that they're all kind of connected, and here you see rings and the next few works are rings. It's not something I choose, it's something that happens somehow, because that's the logic way for me to do the whole thing. And sometimes I read a book that really fascinates me, and that kind of gives something or an idea, and it flows into the work. But most of the time it's not really, I can't pin it down exactly to certain moments often. That, because it's just, yeah, a bit like a tumbleweed in the wind.
I don't actually know whether I'm remembering this right, but Fransica and I first met because I was doing a residency at the Acme fire station in Bow, and they had a Swiss residency program in the studio next to me, and Fransica was one of the artists who came for 6 months, and that's how we met. And before we actually met, I just always remember hearing these audio books. I could hear stories being told in the studio next to me. And then I think, am I remembering this right? And then as we got to know each other, Fransica later told me that often when she's making work, she listens to audiobooks.
Yeah, I mean, that's my biggest addiction, I think, to listen to audiobooks. I get nervous if I don't have some audiobooks around that I didn't listen to yet. So it's a bit like, when I was smoking, I had that. I couldn't have, it made me nervous not to have cigarettes. And it's the same with audiobooks. It makes me nervous. And it just, maybe, or sometimes I don't know, do I listen to audiobooks because I do work like that? Or do I do work like that to be able to listen to audiobooks? I'm not sure.
There was someone at the back.
You talked about playing with materials and your sense of intuition, and I wondered whether you think of drawing as being a thinking process, whether you're kind of aware of, because it seems to me when you're talking about time and the way that you process things, there's a lot of thinking in it.
Yeah. Actually, I wrote it down as well in two images that it is kind of a visualization of a thought, but I didn't say it. I forgot about it. But for example, with those fathoms, and definitely Bourdon as well, but I see them as like a thought, or the visualization of a thought or an idea. Definitely, yeah.
Thanks so
Sorry.
much. Okay, well it's 10 to 8, so if no one's got any more questions, we'll wrap up. And just thank Fransica for coming, especially from Berlin, to be here. So it's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.